He was the greatest enemy the early church ever faced. A religious hitman with a scroll of arrest warrants in one hand and a heart cold as stone. He didn't just disagree with the followers of Jesus. He hunted them. He was a man of pure intellect and lethal zeal, a shark swimming in the bloody waters of first-century Jerusalem. To the Christians hiding in their homes, the sound of his footsteps was the sound of death approaching. But history plays strange tricks. The man who tried to suffocate the gospel became the very breath that carried it to the ends of the earth. The man who traveled the roads to destroy the church became the man who would walk those same roads to build it. He would trade his position of power for a prison cell, his reputation for a criminal's death. His name was Paul, and his story is the ultimate proof that no one is too far gone for the grip of God. Our story begins in Jerusalem, a city on the edge of a knife. The tension was palpable. A new sect known as the Way was spreading like wildfire, claiming that a carpenter from Nazareth was the Messiah and had risen from the dead. For the religious elite, this was blasphemy that had to be cut out like a cancer. And the surgeon holding the knife was a young Pharisee named Saul of Tarsus. Saul was elite. He was educated by the great Gamaliel, zealous for the law and flawless in his heritage. We first meet him not in a synagogue, but at an execution. A young deacon named Stephen had been dragged outside the city walls for preaching Christ. As the mob picked up heavy, jagged stones to crush the life out of him, they needed someone to watch their coats so they could throw with better aim. They laid them at the feet of Saul. He stood there, arms crossed, watching the violence with calm approval. As Stephen looked up to heaven and cried out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them," Saul felt nothing but satisfaction. One heretic down, thousands to go, but one death wasn't enough to satisfy the fire burning in Saul's belly. He began to ravage the church. He was a terror, going from house to house, kicking down doors, dragging out men and women, and throwing them into prison. The screams of families being torn apart meant nothing to him. He believed he was doing God a service. Hearing that the infection had spread to the north, Saul went to the high priest. He demanded letters to the synagogues in Damascus, authorizing him to arrest any followers of Jesus he found there and bring them back to Jerusalem in chains. He gathered his entourage, mounted his horse, and rode out, breathing murderous threats. He was a predator closing in on the kill. But as he neared Damascus at high noon, the world exploded. A light from heaven, brighter than the blazing desert sun, flashed around him. It was a brilliance so pure and overwhelming that it slammed Saul and his companions to the ground. In the dust, blinded by the glory, Saul heard a voice that pierced his soul. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Trembling, Saul asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The answer shattered his entire reality. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The light vanished. The silence returned. Saul stood up, but his world was dark. The man who claimed to see the law so clearly was now stone blind. His companions had to take him by the hand and lead him into Damascus, helpless as a child. For 3 days, the great hunter sat in total darkness. He ate nothing. He drank nothing. He simply sat in the wreckage of his life, realizing that he had been fighting against God himself. In that same city, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord appeared to him in a vision and gave him a command that sounded like a death sentence. "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul." Ananias panicked. "Lord," he argued, "I have heard about this man. I know how much evil he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. He has authority to arrest us all." But the Lord's reply was absolute. "Go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings, and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Ananias obeyed. He walked into the room where the terrorist sat, placed his hands on him, and said the impossible words, "Brother Saul." In that moment, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes. His sight returned, but his vision had changed. He got up and was baptized, washing away the blood of Stephen and the hate of his past. The transformation was violent in its speed. Saul didn't go into hiding to process his feelings. He went straight to the synagogues, the very places he was supposed to present his arrest warrants, and began to preach that Jesus is the Son of God. The Jews were baffled. "Isn't this the man who destroyed those who called on this name?" they whispered. Confusion turned to rage. The hunter became the hunted. The Jews conspired to kill him, watching the city gates day and night. But the disciples took Saul by night and lowered him in a large basket through an opening in the city wall. The proud Pharisee, escaping like a fugitive in a laundry basket. Saul, who would eventually take the Roman name Paul, disappeared into Arabia for a time, then returned with a mission that would tear down the walls of history. He realized the gospel wasn't just for Jews, it was for the whole world. He set out on missionary journeys that would become the stuff of legend. He wasn't traveling in luxury. He was walking thousands of miles over bandit-infested mountains and sailing across treacherous seas. In Lystra, while preaching, Paul saw a man lame from birth. He looked at him and said, "Stand up on your feet." The man jumped up and walked. The crowd went wild, thinking the gods had come down. They tried to sacrifice bulls to Paul, but when Jewish enemies arrived from Antioch, they turned the crowd against him. The cheers turned to rocks. They stoned Paul, dragging his bloody body outside the city and leaving him for dead. The disciples gathered around the pile of what looked like a corpse. But Paul wasn't done. He stirred, he stood up, and with a jaw set like flint, he walked back into the city that had just tried to kill him. He moved on to Philippi, a Roman colony. There, he cast a demon out of a slave girl who predicted the future. Her owners, losing their source of profit, dragged Paul and his companion Silas into the marketplace. The magistrates ordered them stripped and beaten with rods. The blows fell heavy and hard, tearing their flesh. They were thrown into the inner cell of the prison, their feet fastened in stocks. Most men would scream or beg, but at midnight, the other prisoners heard a strange sound. Paul and Silas were singing hymns to God. In the darkness, in the pain, they were worshipping. Suddenly, the ground shook. A violent earthquake rocked the foundations of the prison. The doors flew open. The chains fell off. The jailer, terrified, drew his sword to kill himself, thinking the prisoners had escaped. "Don't harm yourself!" Paul shouted from the darkness. "We are all here!" That night, the jailer washed their wounds, and they washed his soul with the gospel. He and his entire household were baptized. Paul's journey continued to Ephesus, a city of dark magic and the great temple of Artemis. God did extraordinary miracles through Paul. Handkerchiefs and aprons that had touched him were taken to the sick, and illnesses were cured, and evil spirits left them. The power was so undeniable that sorcerers brought their scrolls of magic spells worth millions in today's money and burned them in a public bonfire. The gospel was hitting the economy. The silversmiths, who made idols, started a riot that filled the city theater, shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." For 2 hours, Paul wanted to face the mob, but the disciples held him back. But Paul knew his path led to one place, Rome. The Spirit compelled him to go to Jerusalem first, even though prophets warned him that chains awaited him there. "I am ready not only to be bound," Paul declared, "but also to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." He arrived in Jerusalem, and chaos erupted. He was recognized in the temple. "Men of Israel, help us! This is the man who teaches everyone against our people and our law." The city was aroused. They seized Paul and dragged him out, beating him. The Roman commander had to send soldiers into the fray to pull Paul out before they tore him to pieces. Bound in chains, Paul stood on the steps of the barracks. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked to preach. He told his story, the road to Damascus, the light, the voice to the very mob that wanted his blood. For 2 years, he was held prisoner in Caesarea, a political pawn between corrupt governors. Finally, facing a plot to have him ambushed and killed, Paul played the highest card in his hand. "I appeal to Caesar," he told the governor Festus. "To Caesar you have appealed," Festus replied. "To Caesar you will go." Paul was put on a ship bound for Italy. But the Mediterranean in winter is a graveyard. A storm of hurricane force, the northeaster, struck them. For 14 days, the sky was black. The sailors threw the cargo overboard. They threw the tackle overboard. All hope was lost. But in the howling wind, Paul stood on the deck. "Keep up your courage," he yelled over the roar of the waves. "Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar.'" The ship struck a sandbar and began to break apart in the surf. Soldiers prepared to kill the prisoners to prevent escape, but the centurion, wanting to spare Paul, stopped them. They swam for their lives to the island of Malta. Cold, wet, and shipwrecked, Paul gathered brushwood for a fire. As he laid it on the flames, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened on his hand. The islanders gasped. "This man must be a murderer," they said. "The sea didn't kill him, so justice will." Paul didn't panic. He didn't scream. He shook the snake off into the fire and went back to work. He suffered no ill effects. The islanders changed their minds and said he was a god. Paul used the moment not for glory, but to heal their sick and point them to Jesus. Finally, Paul entered Rome. He entered not as a conqueror, but as a prisoner. He lived under house arrest, chained to a Roman soldier day and night. But chains could not bind the word of God. From his confinement, Paul's mind traveled where his body could not. He dictated letters that would become the backbone of the New Testament. To the Ephesians, he wrote of armor. To the Philippians, he wrote of joy. To the Colossians, he wrote of the supremacy of Christ. He turned his prison cell into a pulpit that would speak for 2,000 years. But the shadow of Nero was growing. The emperor, insane and bloodthirsty, turned his eyes toward the Christians. Paul was arrested again. This time, there was no house arrest. There was the Mamertine dungeon. It was a hole in the ground, cold, damp, smelling of sewage and despair. Paul was alone, save for Luke. He knew the end was here. He picked up his pen one last time to write to his son in the faith, Timothy. The words he wrote were not the words of a victim. They were the words of a victor crossing the finish line. "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day." Tradition tells us that on a bright morning, Paul was led out of the city gates along the Ostian road. He was an old man now. His body was scarred from the whips, the rods, the stones, and the shipwrecks. He walked with a limp, but his head was high. He was led to a chopping block. The executioner stood ready with the sword. Paul, the man who had breathed out murderous threats, now breathed his last prayer of peace. He knelt down. The sword fell. But the blade of Rome could not kill what Paul had started. They buried his body, but his voice echoed louder than ever. The churches he planted grew. The letters he wrote were copied and passed from hand to hand, surviving fires, wars, and empires. The Roman Empire fell into dust, but the kingdom Paul preached stands eternal. The life of Paul is a testament to the radical, transforming power of grace. He was the worst of sinners, yet he became the greatest of apostles. His life teaches us that our past does not define our future. It teaches us that suffering is not the absence of God, but often the place where his power is most perfectly displayed. Paul showed us that to live is Christ, and to die is gain. He challenges us to look at our own lives and ask, are we fighting the good fight? Are we running the race?